All right, so journeys. So once someone once told me that, Dr. Gill, every time you talk about mental health and addiction, you say I and you say we. You include yourself. And a psychologist once said to me, she cautioned me against it. She was like, "Are you sure you want to do that? People are going to think you got a problem." And I was like, "I do got a problem. We all got problems. I don't live in ignorance of my problems. I think we're all on a journey, and certainly my journey has given me a lot of sort of wealth of knowledge. And now I'll just draw a bit about what I think, to just begin, is a graph. And so I was thinking the other day about what is a journey and why are journeys needed. So on this graph, I'll just write, so this is a dual graph. So this will be kind of increasing up, and this will be time. And so there's two lines I'm going to draw, and one is going to be the line of sort of pain. So life, or let's just call it the line of stress. So life starts kind of low stress, but as any of you have noticed, life becomes exponentially more stressful. So we'll call this the stress line. And the thing is if you're and if you're sort of kind of below the stress line, so as children usually we're pretty well resourced, we have parents, and so as kids our and then green is resource. So resource just means it means that our internal and external resources, internal and external. So internal, i.e., your capacity to meditate, prayer, journal, read, yoga, do things to relax, right? That's internal resource. External resources like your parents, your friends, your supports, your community, your job, all that stuff outside of you that you do to support you. So when we're born, typically, but not always, depending on where you start, we are more resourced than stressed, and that means that we are actually happy. So long as your green line is above your red line, you are okay. And so most people, like in their childhood, right? This is childhood. They're okay. But there comes a point where their stress begins to exceed their resources. The resources don't develop. And the greater the sort of difference between your stress and your resource, the more unmiserable you are. So, gap. So this gap equals misery. And whatever you do to deal with misery is that's addiction. And so so most people, when they come to a place like this, they're in this situation. They have the resources of childhood because their childhood may not have given them additional capacity to cope. They are now dealing with a deficit, and that deficit is kind of like right here. And so the frontal cortex is developed, their emotional cortex is not, has not been adequately developed, and so then they have this gap, and that gap makes them miserable. And so what we call a journey, now if you can choose to ignore the gap only gets wider, and the wider it gets, eventually you kind of just die. So I wouldn't leave it for too long if I were you. But let's say you decide to do the opposite. You decide to go on a journey to sort of recover the gap, to kind of heal. And so how does that happen in time? And so I applaud anybody who's listening to this, because you're interested in going on a journey. And so I want to describe this process where we're kind of I want to just describe this, because I don't think this is well understood. There's a lot of dogma and stuff around, what happens. So I'm going to just pull this out over here. And so what happens is so the pain is kind of like way up here, and it's kind of going up like that, and you're kind of starting right here, and you're miserable, or you're suffering. And so a couple of things to know about journeys. A journey is taken in steps. It's taken over decades. So journeys are taken over decades, years and decades. They don't happen in kind of in one go. So you attend one IOP and you're good. No, that's not how it works. Especially not in non-IOPs. Our primary purpose in these IOPs is to give skills and build awareness, because the actual work of recovery is delayed until you have awareness and skills. And so we seek to build skills and expose to a little bit of awareness in hopes that we are able to further a chain reaction. So let's say you take a journey. So a journey over decades happens like this. So you do a little bit of work, you plateau, regress a little bit, you do a bit more work, you plateau, you do a bit more, you plateau, and in this period you're miserable still, yes, but you're getting less miserable. You may or may not be aware of that. You may just feel like you've made no progress. But eventually, your misery, you kind of make it into the green. Maybe pass back into the red and pass back into the green, and then if you keep at it, you just leave the red behind, because journeys are exponential. So journeys are exponential, and there's a reason for that, because anything that is grown in time is like the soil of the universe, and it grows anything, and it doesn't just grow it at a linear rate, it grows at an exponential rate. And so a lot of so pain grows exponentially. We can understand that, right? Exponential growth is like 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 isn't 6, it's 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32, times 2 is 64, It's not 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. That's just 16 and a lot of work. So exponential growth of anything is powerful. And the potency of going on a journey, a lot of the reasons why people stop going on journeys is because early on, progress is slow. Slow to the point where it seems like no progress. Or it seems like the age-old thing that we always hear around here, that didn't work for me. And the real question that I always ask when I hear that is, how long did you give it? And did you troubleshoot all the problems? Because, for example, we talk a lot about self-therapy. Self-therapy is that practice of connecting, self-therapy, which is really what a journey is. Connect to self, connect to others, and crucially commit to daily practice. And why? Because unless you continue to commit and do repetitively, you'll pause. If you're not meditating every day, you'll pause. And you may not get a lot at the beginning. It may feel like yesterday you meditated, or you journaled, or you talked to a friend in recovery, and you didn't really get any further. And so you conclude that this doesn't work. But actually, it just was exponential growth. But the thing about exponential growth is at the beginning, it's like this pain graph right here. This right here is exponential. Even though it looks very much like a straight line, exponential always starts small. And why is this important? Is because even though it's starting small, it's changing very, very rapidly, but you just don't realize it. And so I'll share something that a meditator once said. He was doing this meditation called the Bound Lotus, which is not one that I would suggest to anyone, at least not any novice, to do. But he wrote a blog, and I'm told in the blog this is what he wrote. He said he did this for 15,000 days, and on the 15,000th day doing this meditation, he said something like this, which is, that meditative experience that I had on the 15,000th day is deeper than all of the 14,999 days combined. And so, that is only possible if it's exponential growth, right? If you're, I know I'm being a little bit mathematical here, but it's important to understand what exponential growth is, because growth in this period of time from here to here is that much, or it's like, let's say it's this much. But in that same period of time, growth from here to here is like what? This much, right? So the growth at any given time becomes very, very large. And so it's very important. Where do you go from here? Remembering that a journey takes decades, and that you may well be at a slow point, but if you keep going, you can very much get to exponential growth. So that's kind of my first point. So it takes decades, it's exponential. My third point is it happens in legs or phases. So every now and again you come across people, places, and things that augment and accelerate your journey. And so that's why I draw it like this. So it's not like a straight, pain increases in time. That kind of makes sense, right? The struggles of a high schooler seem really major, but then, that's pretty minor stuff until, because when you get into university, the stakes go higher. When you get into independent life, it gets higher. When you get married, have kids, it gets higher. If you get divorced, it gets higher. If you get into criminal records and stuff, it gets higher. There's endless number of ways that life can get sort of painful and complicated. That are it just grows in time, and it doesn't grow linearly; it grows exponentially. So healing happens in phases. Very rarely do I ever meet anybody who's never done anything. In fact, I've never met anybody who's not done anything to heal. So it happens in legs and phases, meaning I remember the very first course that I took was a leadership course in grade 11, and I was amazed that this course would it was called Dale Carnegie, and there was one part of this course that was very helpful that I didn't realize was trauma therapy at the time, but I was kind of shocked actually that a leadership course, a public speaking course, would have anything in there having to do with self-confidence, because I thought it was just about technique back then. But it was in this one it was called the Scream Session, which really consisted of just basically kind of screaming your frustrations in the middle of a supportive crowd, and just kind of saying your truth without judgment, which was profoundly healing for me and really helped spur on that journey, which didn't mean I didn't have to go through all of the difficulties that I had to go through, but it was a leg. It was like a number 1. And then there was a number 2. And then there was a number 3 and a 4 and a 5 and then a 6. And there will be continuing to be more. And at some point it'll work out for you if you keep at it. Phases can be anything. They can be courses. They can be teachers that you meet. They can be jobs that you take that have some self-development opportunities. They could be mentors that you meet. And so, inevitably, if you're open-minded, opportunities are everywhere, because there's a saying in yoga that I like, which is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so we spend so much time trying to find the right thing. But I suggest to you that teachers are a dime a dozen. Teachings are a dime a dozen. Just go to any chapters. You'll find tons of teaching there. It's not about the teaching. I've looked at so many of those books, and they all say the same thing. They don't say anything substantially different, really. And yet one resonates for you and another one doesn't. One mentor says the same thing another one does, and at another time in your life you weren't ready for it, and so it doesn't. And so journeys are about this. When the student, I think I might have skipped over, is ready. It's about readying yourself. And how do you ready yourself? You just make a habit of self-therapy. You connect to yourself every day. Connecting to self can be things like meditation. Meditation is a skill that builds in time. You can practice breathing. You can do gratitude journaling. There's all sorts of things you can do. to connect to yourself. But each time you do it, each time you do anything, you're progressing yourself up this path. And you're readying yourself for these growth periods. Because it's not all the time that you'll have a teacher. Some people's teacher betrays them. Teachers are not always the same forever. Some paths you're only meant to be on for a period of time before it doesn't serve you anymore. Other paths you traverse for a long time. That's important. But the thing is, if you're not ready, then the path won't appear before you in any way that you can digest. And so journeys are about readiness. They're about inside. And if you are connecting to yourself, people always ask me, what about connecting to others? Can I just meditate my way to serenity? And the answer is, yeah, sure, of course you can. But when you all close your eyes, I don't know what's happening inside that mind of yours. Not one clue. I can tell you, though, the signs of someone who is progressing in a journey. They're getting happier. They're blaming others less. They're less internally conflicted. Their company is becoming healthier. Because healthy people keep healthy company. Miserable people keep miserable company. So there's signs of change that happen in someone who's able to connect to themselves profoundly. And the truth is anyone who's healthy has a community of health. So, whether that is something like church, or a support group, activist group, whatever. Healthy group of people also walking a journey. Those are the best people. Not perfect people, because perfect people aren't perfect, because they're saying they're perfect. Anybody walking a journey is going to be someone who can serve you. So the point is that what is it then? So when the student is ready, a teacher appears. So get yourself ready to be a student. Get yourself ready to sort of accept teachings and things. And so we'll just then talk about what is it that you're doing. When you're doing all these things, when you're connecting with people, what is it actually that you're doing? And all journeys, I don't care what kind of therapy you do, all journeys are about trauma processing. They're about letting go of the past, remembering that we are in a Roman handshake with the past, meaning it's not a simple handshake. Simple handshakes are a Western thing. A Roman handshake is a simple handshake is one that if one side lets go, the other side lets go. So lots of people are mistakenly thinking they're in a simple handshake with the past. And they think that if they, just because they don't want to think about the past, that they've let it go, or just because they've said they're going to let it go, they've let it go. That's called denial, also called delusional. The truth is we're in a Roman handshake with the past. A Roman handshake is a handshake that we use when one person's wrist grabs the other person's wrist. So it's a double grab. So some people are not ready to let go of the past. So they're in a double grip with the past, because the past isn't ready to let go of them first. An example of someone like that is someone who says something like this, which is, if I get not angry, if I'm no longer angry when I think about that memory, that means it wasn't significant. That's a blocking belief that many hold about painful things of the past. And so they just stay angry, thinking the anger is almost like a gravestone that signifies something bad that happens, without the realization that that anger is hurting them, it's corroding them, and And there's other ways to memorialize and remember and action the past. So, a Roman handshake with the past. So, let's say you say, no, I'm done with the past. Okay, good. So now you've at least got one part of it done. But there's the other hand still hold it. Because the past is not done with you. And so, journeys are about letting the go of the past and having the past let go of you, which we understand it as a process of awareness, first step is awareness. Awareness, and there's 4 parts to this. So first one is awareness. Second one is compassion. Awareness of self, awareness of others. How they've affected you, which can give you an opportunity for compassion of self, of others, which can give you an opportunity of forgiveness, which can lead you to the neutrality of acceptance. That's trauma therapy in a nutshell. And the process of letting go of the past is it's helpful to understand in the context of these 4 things, because it's an onion, as we've talked about. So you go through this process once and you shed one of the layer, but there's lots of layers beneath that, and there's lots of onions. There's probably a truckload of onions. Get your peeler and just start. You get better at peeling. Maybe someone equips you with like an industrial peeler. You peel faster and get some electricity. You can become very quick. So that meditator who had the deepest experience he's ever had at 15,000 meditations compared to the previous 14,999 combined, he just upgraded his peeler. That didn't just happen though. He put in the work and got to that point of exponential growth whereby he can just feel the benefit. And so I want to talk a little bit about each of these steps. So when there is no awareness, awareness is an ebb and a flow. So lots of people, they ebb and flow between awareness and denial. Denial, when it's involuntary, is considered repression, subconscious repression. Awareness, when it is conscious, is denial. That didn't happen, or it happened, but it's not important. So it's the effort of stuffing back down. And awareness inevitably is of self and others. Everything is about self, everything is about others. Most people, they start with fixing the self in relation to the self. So, for example, I am lovable. First, you got to believe that of yourself. Then you'll be able to believe that of anyone else. And that's if you can believe it deeply of yourself, then you can believe it deeply of others. It's self and then others, self and then others. And so awareness is what IOP is about. Awareness is exposure to little bits of awareness. Awareness is being triggered in you every time your amygdala is firing. Anytime your amygdala fires from a trigger is an opportunity to pursue where is that coming from. And it's, for many, you oftentimes just go back to denial or back to repression. Do your drugs and alcohol thing, or negative coping. Just push it down with food. Eat the emotion, as they say. And so, but awareness is constantly sort of being generated. Awareness happens through exposure. Awareness can happen through exposure to information, reading books. There's taking courses, meeting people. This is why connect to self, connect to others is so important. Because unless you input new information into a system, it can't change. That's a law of thermodynamics, that the energy of a system can't actually change without external energy being put in. So the Earth is a closed system. There's a vacuum around the Earth. And so if it was just that, we would be a rock, much like the asteroids. But energy comes in by the sun, and it drives change inside our system. And that change allows for things to happen. And so by connecting to other people with different ideas, different approaches, different things, then you are developing awareness. And it takes decades. The hardest of these is awareness. Awareness is the hardest. This is the thing that takes decades. If decades is how long the journey is, it is because awareness takes time, and you're fortunate, very fortunate, to meet someone who can raise awareness in you. And so what happens then, after you raise awareness, is you have a choice. You can choose denial. That's oftentimes why it takes decades, is because you bounce between denial and sort of awareness. But let's say then you progress, and then you're like, okay, I'm aware. Now you have an opportunity to practice compassion. And the best way to understand compassion is like a battery. Because if we view something with compassion, it doesn't hurt as much. A politician once asked me if when the hailstorm struck Calgary, whether that created a lot of additional calls to our clinic for support, people struggling to cope. And the answer to that, she was surprised. I said, nope, not a single call from the hailstorm damage. And she was like, that shocks me. Well, I would think that significant financial strain would cause that to result, but the reality is that natural disasters are impersonal. So we don't get a lot of calls about natural disasters because people don't generally think the world has it so far much out against them that they blame even the weather. It has something special in it just for them. Most people understand natural disasters just kind of happen and it sucks and you just kind of move on. But what does cause people a lot of stress is when the relatives don't show up for their wedding 20 years ago, or a sibling feud from like 30 years ago, and someone just sent an email that hurt them. That stuff we get lots of calls about. But the hailstorm? Nope. Not much. Because it's easier to be compassionate with the weather than it is with people who've hurt you. And so the things we do to build compassion in ourselves are things like connecting to ourselves, connecting to others. So self-therapy, I'll just call it ST, builds and fills your battery. And the battery oscillates between empty and full. So we kind of makes sense. You fill up your battery, you sleep, you're okay, you're recharged, and then you live your day. And then your ex calls you complaining or sends you a threatening text, or your boss yells at you for some reason, or you remember some trauma that you don't want to really deal with but comes up anyways, and it takes half your energy just to kind of deal with that, and by the end of the day you're empty again. And so then the next day you just try to fill it up again, and you kind of keep doing this back and forth thing, because or you just give. So you just you give things to people. Like one of the most common forms of sort of coping is giving to people. Some people they sort of just, their occupation in life is just giving. A lot of healthcare people are like that. They kind of derive identity from giving. But a lot of times, though, they're not focusing on self-therapy. They're not energizing their battery, and so they're actually constantly, they're probably giving more, and so they're constantly kind of going between empty and like really empty, and that's when they kind of get all depressed and suicidal and not so good. The journey part of this is that compassion is very much like a battery. Self-therapy, going to church, praying, meditating, all that's going to fill your battery. But the thing is that battery, that energy of compassion needs to be discharged in an act of forgiveness. If you can do that, that's an act. It's a voluntary act. And if you can do that, then it does empty your battery, but it does so in a permanent way, because acceptance, neutrality of acceptance is permanent. That's something that people don't always understand about trauma therapy. That's why I like trauma therapy, is that when you deal with something of the past in a permanent way, it truly is permanent. It doesn't go away. It doesn't come back. If you've only dealt with one of 4 layers, well, yeah, the 3 layers are still going to be there, but the 4th layer is not. It's never coming back, because that was made in childhood, and when that's processed, then it's neutral. And so the mistake people make is they don't do the actual conscious act of forgiving. Again, self and others. And that's a conscious act. And that's an act that needs to occur. Those are words that need to be said. Those are emotions that need to be expressed with the intent of letting go. And the important thing, the word here to remember, is it is a conscious thing. You don't just forgive unconsciously. You forgive consciously. You forgive. You actually sort of you know. It's something that you can choose to do. And if you have enough compassion built up, it will actually take and it will heal. You know, someone once asked me, why do spiritual people do bad things? And it's not that they're necessarily doing bad, they're not necessarily doing the wrong thing. Many spiritual people have very robust self-therapy practice. But the trouble is they're not visiting the forgiveness piece. So they're thriving off a lot of full energy, but inevitably they end up in this giving with what they don't have. But they have a lot of societal expectations that, oh, they're the spiritual person, and then eventually they act badly. But the idea that and when you get to the root of those issues, it's usually things they have not dealt with that are draining their battery a lot faster. And so simply gathering energy is not enough. A lot of folks, at NOM, we're quite interested in treatment-resistant recovery. Treatment-resistant recovery is usually this. So people who've done a lot of work, like they're doing a ton of meetings, ton of therapy, tons of stuff over the years, and they're still oscillating between this, and they're kind of stuck. It's usually an inability to kind of have this, and this can be facilitated. Lots of traditions have ways of doing that. Some of those ceremonies, shamans and stuff, priests, confession is a Catholic thing, whereby you sort of talk about the things that you did that were wrong, and then someone forgives you. Every culture, every sort of way has go to a therapist, and the therapist, you tell them something deep, dark that you did, and the therapist says, hey, you know what, you're just human. Things happen. Forgive yourself, and it helps. But you have to actually put in the effort of that. You actually have to do it. And if you don't do it, then you kind of stay, inevitably, you stay sort of in this situation. And when you have a lot of trauma, this is a thing to remember. You're much faster about going here than about recovering, because you just got a lot of drains on your energy. So you're draining faster than you're coming up. So that's why you spend a lot of time kind of empty. And if you do, whatever way, a lot of people like AA, right? Everyone knows 12-step programs, whether you like them or not. It's a trauma therapy protocol. So, AA, Refuge, Dharma Recovery, there's all sorts of them out there, but they all kind of talk about, and they have a system for doing that. And if you go through that system, it will benefit. And then finally acceptance. Like I said, acceptance is permanent, and it just comes back to this sort of, onion. Scratch one of these layers off, go to the next one. The last thing that I'll just mention about journeys is that this whole process is kind of full of blocks. There's a reason why it takes, in this case, seven legs to this particular journey that I wrote. Because there's blocks. There's blocks that are energetic. There's blocking beliefs, like the anger thing. That one might take you a couple of decades to kind of get through. There's dissociation that can get in the way, which is when you're not fully connected to parts. Your information in your mind is stored in ways that are separated by these blocks that you can't actually see what another part of your mind is thinking, which is a very common trauma-derived block, which is why we stress that journeys are about committing to daily practice. Because connecting to yourself, connecting to others, and commitment to walk around the path will inevitably lead you to the right path. And so, you sort of, if I describe a journey, right? So you start here in birth, and you kind of, there's all sorts of ways that you could go, but, you're kind of journeying along. Every fork in the road, you choose one kind of thing, and then here you are. And let's say you don't really like where you are. Well, it's a bit of a journey to kind of, let's say you want to be further north. Well, again, you got to navigate a bunch of forks in the road, choose a direction that's kind of better for you. And eventually, you kind of end up in a different place that maybe is a bit better. The journey, that's why it has to be a daily practice. Because journeys are taken one step at a time. One step at a time. You didn't get here all of a sudden. All of you took decades to get here. And journeys begin the moment you decide that every path has a recovery. Every fork in the road has a recovery fork or a not recovery fork. And you can choose. And by choosing not recovery more often, then you end up in a place that is down. And so we have to understand that journeys are an iterative process. But if you do simply this, connect to self each day, find someone, others, and when I say others, right, I'm going to just kind of qualify this. Others, like, in recovery. So if you have a husband who's kind of not in recovery, it's healthy to connect to him, but he may not be able to help you go up this path. Because the only ones who can help you go up this path are people who are already on this path. Someone who's over here can help somebody who's over here. That connection, if it becomes regular, will help this person kind of shortcut and accelerate in their process. And so this is why we recommend that people do daily practices, and why that not just be in their own head. Because ultimately, there's every path has a sign. So there's a recovery sign at every fork. The question is, do you see it? And the answer is most don't. They can't see it. They're not sensitive enough to see it. But no matter where you are, there's a sign. And if you can't see it, then enlist the brain of someone who can. And chances are you'll walk in the right direction. And so, a really good movie to watch if you want to understand journeys. It's a little bit cliche, but it is a and I'm not getting any money from these guys, but I'll just recommend this. Eat, Love, Pray. But watch it from a perspective of self-therapy. Watch it from a perspective, not of Julia Roberts as an actress, but just watch it from a perspective of this graph. Watch what her leg of her journey is. Watch where she has hiccups. Sometimes the hiccups are internal, like doubt. Some people, their journey involves overcoming their revulsion of spirituality. the rejection, when they realize that it's not necessarily like a higher power that they have a thing against, it's that dad was a jerk and he was religious. And so they get hung up on that until they sort of decide that, hey, I'm not going to let dad take this away from me too. But that's a process. That's a process of actually kind of differentiating trauma from identity. And so when one of the best ways to understand trauma, complex trauma especially, is that if pink is identity, and it's all kind of mixed in with red, which is trauma, it's really hard to discern what belief, what is your identity and what is trauma-derived belief systems that are ingrained. And so journey is fundamentally a process whereby we allow this container to separate out, identity and trauma. And when we have clarity, it's very easy to just kind of say, all right, this stuff needs to go. Take it out to the trash. It no longer serves us. But it's really hard to do that here because it's mixed in. You have to give up stuff of yourself in order to let that go. And so the journey is to allow the oil and the water to separate. And if you allow that, then it's easier to let things go. And what you realize is that there's blocking beliefs all throughout this. Blocking beliefs that have gotten you stuck. Trauma-derived blocking beliefs that have gotten you stuck. And the only way to unstuck yourself is by questioning long-held beliefs. The only way to do that is to connect to other people. Connect to, if you've only known corrupt, mean, spiritual people in your life, connect to some people now who are spiritual but not corrupt and mean. Learning trauma, people forget this all the time, but trauma processing is a process of both unlearning. Everybody's in a hurry to unlearn, but it's unlearning plus relearning. And the most efficient way we learn is by connecting to healthy people, which we may never have known before. We may have never known a healthy person growing up. So we got to start now. Maybe that starts with a therapist. Maybe that starts with someone like us. But be open to the fact that what you've held as a belief for so long may be trauma-derived. And so that's a profound realization oftentimes. So those are my kind of comments on sort of those are my comments on journeys. And so I'm just gonna pause this. Oh, here we are.